Are side-by-sides dangerous? If you consider over 100 hand crush and amputation injuries dangerous, then yes. If you consider Polaris issuing 19 separate recalls for razors and other side-by-sides catching on fire, then they are dangerous. There's a reason the aftermarket for roll cages or ROPS is so extensive. People don't feel safe with the stock ROPS. Our office has litigated against UTV and side-by-side manufacturers over the past decade. In our cases, 3 product liability defect claims come up repeatedly. First, rollovers without nets causing arm and hand injuries in low-speed rollovers where people put their hand out due to a reflex towards the ground as they're falling. Second, Polaris vehicles igniting on fire when people were just trying to go out for a fun drive. Third, roll cages failing in rollover incidents and injuring the occupants because they didn't hold up. We've litigated 4 separate amputation cases in multiple hand or arm crush cases. In discovery, we've uncovered well over 100 cases of similar accidents involving rollovers where people had their hands and arms crushed or amputated. Oftentimes, there's a moderate, even slow speed rollover. Slow as 7 miles an hour. Passenger or driver, and your vehicle starting to tip over, your natural inclination is to put your arm out to the ground. It's a reflex, like blinking your eyes. Don't take our words for it. Here's Polaris' own Matt Parks.
In an emergency situation, always hold on the steering wheel. Sometimes the natural response is put your hand out, like you're falling.
One manufacturer, Honda, does the right thing. Their talents for years have come with nets as standard stock equipment. Check out what the Honda manual says. Under keep doors and side nets closed. Making sure the doors and the side nets are closed, the side net buckles are fastened and secure, helps keep the drivers and passengers' arms and legs inside the occupant protection structure, should the vehicle tip or turn over. In other words, nets keep your arms from leaving the vehicle and getting crushed in a rollover. Polaris used to sell nets as an aftermarket product. Check these out. They're going to do a hell of a better job protecting your arms than if you have no net. Can-Am today sells nets, not as stock, but as an aftermarket product. Can-Am's engineers describe the nets as NASCAR nets. They know that these are safety features. They just don't want to put them on as stock features. Do UTVs have stability requirements? There are minimum standards. The vehicle center of gravity is raised. It can easily and most likely withstand the side-by-side out of spec. So you couldn't sell that vehicle as a fresh vehicle to the public. It is the people doing the modifications, changing tires, changing ROPS, putting spare tires from the same manufacturers on the roofs. Those people don't know about the minimum safety standards for stability. How were these standards set? And why are they so suspect? About 15 years ago, the feds, through the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the CPSC, were seeking to impose safety standards on UTVs. Stability standards, roof strength standards, and so forth. Unlike automobiles, where NHTSA can mandate specific safety standards, the CPSC can't do that when an industry self-regulates by adopting voluntary standards. The CPSC is then legally hindered from imposing safety standards in most circumstances. So in response to the CPSC making rules that were going to require tougher standards for UTVs, Polaris, Honda, Can-Am, and others created a group called ROVA, which stands for Recreational Off-Highway Vehicle Association. It's a captive group. Now here's a list of some of those who were involved with ROVA and its early organization. You can see it's just the manufacturers. These were the same people who were fighting the CPSC regulations. And what did these ROVA members do? they adopted minimum standards. We're going to quickly discuss three of them. Two are physical tests, and one is called the stability coefficient that the vehicles must meet prior to the manufacturer distributing them. Two physical tests are called the J-turn test and the circle test. Their names are pretty good descriptions. In both tests, they fix outriggers onto the side-by-side. Here's some outriggers on a motorcycle, on a Volvo car, and here's an outrigger on a tractor trailer. And the J-turn test, the UTV goes straight until it hits 50 miles an hour. Then the driver inputs a 110-degree turning of the wheel and holds it for 5 seconds. So it makes a big J. Then 4 more times to the left, 5 more times to the right, rinse and repeat. They actually do it 10 times. If the UTV goes up on 2 wheels, here's a UTV, if it's doing the test, and these 2 wheels get off the ground 2 out of 10 times, and it fails. The circle test is similar. You put the outriggers on, they get the vehicles going in circles up to a certain speed, at a certain distance. They go 5 times to the left, 5 times to the right. If it goes up on 2 wheels more than 10 times, it fails. The other stability requirement, it's a minimum requirement that UTVs side-by-sides have to meet for manufacturers to distribute them, is something called a stability coefficient, also known as a KST. I didn't come up with these terms, their engineers did. It's a formula that takes certain requirements from the stock vehicle and puts them into an equation. Here's a look at the equation. The KST, or ratio, has to be above 1.0. So you have these factors in the numerator and these factors in the denominator, and they've got to be at least 1.0. One of the things you can notice that the bottom of the equation is the vertical center of gravity. That means if the larger the vertical center of gravity is, the lower the overall number is going to be. If you have a KST of 1, 1.01, 1.02, and you increase the vehicle center of gravity by a quarter inch, a half inch, a full inch, it's very likely to go out of spec. And the manufacturer would not have been able to sell that vehicle and distribute that vehicle to the public because it wouldn't have even met those minimum ROVA standards. Manufacturers of UTVs have to provide what's called a Section 15 report. It has to be provided timely to the CPSC about known hazards or defects. Polaris paid a $27.25 million civil penalty for failing to report defective side-by-side incidents related to the fire issues. At the time, it was the largest CPSC fine in United States history. Polaris issued 19 different recalls for dangers to their side-by-sides and catching on fire. Here's a quick list of the vehicles that were recalled. You can find these on our website too to see if your vehicle was ever issued a recall. Polaris has litigated fire cases, but none are known to have gone to trial. They've all settled. If you have a fire case, let us know. We know where the bodies are buried, and we can help you. They've known about the problems for years. We've handled cases of overheating against Polaris since 2011. Our office has handled individual cases regarding roll cage failures, and we're actually a class counsel in a certified class action against Polaris. Is there a reason so many people question the stock ROPS and replace them? There is. Side-by-sides must meet these ROVA standards that we've discussed. For roll cages, ROVA requires compliance with either an ISO standard for the roof of a earth-moving vehicle, like these big bobcats, or separately, an OSHA standard for farm tractors from the 1970s. Here's the bobcats, here's the tractors in the 70s. They don't look like side-by-sides. Most of the manufacturers choose the farm tractor standard instead of the earth-moving bobcat standard. ROVA, they could have chosen the same standard that applies to automobiles called FMVSS 216. It was adopted about the same time. That requires an automobile roof to withstand 3 times the gross vehicle weight of the car or truck. Once the manufacturers who chose the OSHA standard, they still didn't follow that 1970 tractor standard. The farm tractor standard was from the 1970s, when farm tractors were big, slow, and usually had only one person in the vehicle, like this. 29 CFR 1928.53 is the actual test for the farm tractors and the roll cages. It requires that a certain force be applied to the roll cage from certain directions, and the vehicle, it can only deflect so much. But how much force is actually applied is critical. That's the real thing. That is determined under the formula for a definition for tractor weight. Weight is defined as 29 CFR section 1928.51 subsection A. It's a mouthful, as. And here it is. Tractor weight that includes the protective frame or enclosure, all fuels, and other components required for normal use of the tractor. Ballast shall be added as necessary to achieve a minimum total weight of 110 pounds per maximum takeoff horsepower at the rated engine speed, or the maximum gross vehicle weight specified by the manufacturer, whichever is the greatest. So this horsepower ratio or the gross vehicle weight, whichever is greatest. The front end weight shall be at least 25% of the tractor test weight in case power takeoff horsepower is not available. And let me start this over again, this is really important. In case power takeoff horsepower is not available, 95% of net engine flywheel horsepower should be used. Now farm tractors were heavy, they didn't have a lot of acceleration. Side-by-sides are light and have horsepower similar to a 1978 Trans Am, which had 180 horses. The test requires using the greater of the maximum gross vehicle weight or the horsepower ratio. Side-by-sides, the horsepower ratio is always greater, but the manufacturers test it with the gross vehicle weight, not 3 times like the FMVSS, 1 time. The importance of the horsepower ratio is it also takes into account kinetic energy, the speed of the UTV that could affect the roll cage in case of a rollover or an incident. Despite the clear language, manufacturers, they argue in courts that they can ignore the last sentence of the statute that says, in case power takeoff horsepower is not available, 95% of net engine flywheel horsepower should be used. This went up to a United States District Court judge, Judge John Mendez in the Eastern District of California. And this is what he said in part in his ruling. The crux of their competing views lies in whether the last sentence of this provision regarding flywheel horsepower applies to situations where the vehicle in question lacks a power takeoff. That's in all these instances, because no side-by-side has a power takeoff. Defendant's argument that Section 1928.53's testing requirements permit them to use gross vehicle weight in all instances when their vehicles lack a PTO is unpersuasive. Defendant's interpretation would render the last sentence of this provision superfluous. The court found that plaintiff is correct and that the statute does require to use the horsepower ratio in determining whether it's greater or not. ROVA could have adopted any standard for roof strength. They could have taken the automobile standard, which had just been changed around the same time. That same standard applies for Suburbans, F-150s, and those Kia Soul things, and Mazda Miatas. Polaris and its friends in ROVA could have made sure your side-by-side ROPS had as much strength, roof strength, as one of these Kia Souls. And that requires the roof to withstand 3 times the gross vehicle weight. Your side-by-side is way more likely to roll over than a Kia Soul. Too bad the Kia Soul has a much stronger roof and passes a much tougher test than your side-by-side. If you have any questions about side-by-side ROPS, feel free to reach out to us. Also remember to subscribe right here.